What if the richest man in America erased his own bloodline? A hidden heir lost to time, swept under the rug of history. What would you do if the very foundation of an empire was built on lies? The truth is buried, but it's not forgotten. Stick around and I'll reveal the dark secret Jay Gould never wanted you to know. The year is 1889. In the heart of New York, amidst the splendor of mansions and the relentless clatter of the railroad tracks, a discovery is made in the dusty corners of a forgotten public archive. A single, hastily scribbled document, torn from its place in history, begins to unravel the very fabric of one of America's wealthiest dynasties. Jay Gould, the railroad magnate who built empires and rewrote the rules of power, had a son who was not meant to exist in the annals of his legacy, a name. It had been removed. The document had been altered, the ink smudged where it once stood, as if the very essence of his bloodline was too dangerous to leave a trace. This was no mere omission. This was an act of deliberate erasure. The heir of Gould, a forgotten child, was excised from history, stripped of his inheritance and his future within the family empire. But why? What was so powerful about this figure that the Gould family felt the need to suppress his very existence? The answer lies buried in the silence of the mansion's halls, where whispers of a forbidden truth linger. The media, hungry for scandal, only hinted at the story. Some said he was a bastard child. Others suggested a deeper, darker motive for his removal. Yet no one knew for certain. What was to be gained by eliminating him from the line of succession? And what did it cost the rest of the Gould family, those who remained in the spotlight while this ghostly heir faded into nothing? There were rumors, of course. Rumors of silenced witnesses, of erased letters and papers burned in the dead of night, of whispered conversations in shadowed corners where deals were struck in secrecy and destinies were written in invisible ink. Public records seemed deliberately vague, and the press, eager to stir the pot of high society, didn't seem to ask the right questions. Meanwhile, the Gould family continued to flourish in the public eye, their name tied to grand fortunes and towering mansions. But behind the grandiose facade, there was a secret, and it was one they would go to any lengths to keep buried. So why was this name so dangerous? What did Jay Gould fear so deeply that he would sacrifice his own flesh and blood? What legacy could be so fragile that it required such extreme measures to protect? This is the story that the elite tried to erase, but we're here to uncover it. This channel exists to reveal the stories hidden behind closed doors, the ones no one wants you to know. Have you ever heard of a lost heir who was never meant to inherit? If this tale resonates with you, if it reminds you of other forgotten names or sealed rooms, leave a comment below. Let's explore the truth together before it slips into the shadows once more. The truth is closer than you think, and it's waiting to be uncovered. Keep watching. The air in the archives was thick with the weight of time, each page of the faded documents whispering a story that had long been hidden. In a dimly lit room, buried beneath layers of dust, a stack of papers trembled as the faintest breath disturbed them. The year was 1889, and the power of the Gould family, like the towering steel railroads they controlled, stretched across America. But beneath the surface of this empire lay cracks too deep to be seen by the public eye. The very foundation of Jay Gould's legacy was built not only on wealth, but on secrecy. A secrecy that, until now, had held the key to one of the greatest erasures in American history. Gould was not just a magnate of railroads, he was a master of power, maneuvering in ways that transcended business and delved into the deepest recesses of American society. As the nation's wealth was concentrated into the hands of a few, men like Gould, Rockefeller, and Vanderbilt crafted their legacies with iron fists and silken gloves. Their wealth commanded not just markets, but minds, shaping the policies that built America's golden future. Yet in the shadows of their mansions, where gilded chandeliers flickered, a different kind of power struggle was unfolding. One where even the lives of their own blood could be easily swept aside if it meant preserving their dynasty. The Goulds, like the other families who held the reins of America's Industrial Revolution, understood that the survival of their legacy depended not just on fortune, but on control. Control over their heirs, their names, their bloodlines. A misplaced word, a wrong decision, and the family's reputation could be forever tainted. In the ruthless game of inheritance, everything was at stake. And in the case of Jay Gould, a son had been born, one whose very existence threatened the power he had carefully built. A son whose name was meant to be forgotten, not just by the world, but by the family that could not afford to acknowledge him. As the years passed, the public continued to celebrate the Gould name, with its opulent mansions and iron empires, yet a darker, quieter history simmered beneath the surface. The son, the forgotten heir, was erased from every record, as if his very presence had been a mistake. No mention of him existed in the family's official documents, no heirloom passed down in his name. The word family was rewritten to exclude him, as if he had never been. Yet in the quiet corners of the mansion there were remnants, documents, letters, and whispers. A document buried deep within the archives would tell the story. The silence surrounding this heir was deafening. The silence of men who knew that to expose this truth would be to risk their entire empire. There were rumors that Jay Gould had gone to great lengths to bury the boy, even burning letters, altering records, and forcing witnesses to remain silent. No one dared ask questions, and those who did, those who might have had answers, found themselves excluded, their voices lost in the shadows of history. But the truth, like all truths, does not die easily. Records of this erased heir, hidden within the vast system of the Gould family's empire, began to surface, one by one. A few words, a name, scribbled in the margins of a ledger, forgotten by all but a few. These documents, now dusted off by the most curious, reveal a story far darker than anyone could have imagined. For in the Gilded Age, where fortunes were built and broken on the whims of the few, the value of a name was more precious than any gold. But the question remains, what was so dangerous about this heir that Jay Gould would go to such lengths to bury him? What power did he hold that could threaten the family's empire? These are questions that no one dared to answer. But as the truth begins to surface, one thing is clear. The Gould legacy was far more fragile than anyone could have imagined. In the quiet, cold halls of their mansion, an object remains, a lone portrait. Its frame is pristine, but the face, the one that should belong to the forgotten son, has been scratched away. The rest of the family remains, frozen in time. But this one figure, his face erased, his name erased, speaks volumes. As the final stroke of the brush is completed, the room falls silent once more. There is no telling what the true cost of revealing this secret will be, but one thing is certain: this forgotten heir, though silenced by the powerful men who sought to bury him, will not be forgotten for long. The truth is inching closer, and when it finally emerges, the consequences will be far greater than anyone could have imagined. The name, long erased, is now waiting to be revealed, waiting for the day when it is no longer hidden in the shadows of the Gould legacy. But that day has yet to come, and until it does, silence remains. In the dim light of a forgotten room, a single drawer creaked open. It was an old file cabinet, its brass handles tarnished by years of neglect, its insides filled with the weight of secrets never meant to see the light of day. The papers within were yellowed with age, brittle to the touch, but among them lay a document so carefully concealed, it seemed as if the very act of hiding it had been part of its design. The smell of old ink and parchment filled the air, thick and musty, as the truth began to unravel itself. The document was a revision of Jay Gould's will, a document that should have never existed. The ink was faded, the handwriting deliberate in its omissions, as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase a name that had once been etched in the future of the Gould family. But here it was, in black and white, clear for the eyes of anyone brave enough to uncover it. The illegitimate son of Jay Gould was nowhere to be found in the will. There were no mentions, no inheritance, no claim to the vast fortune that had been so carefully built. It was as if he had never existed at all. The question lingered, as thick as the dust in the air. Who had made this decision? Who had gone to such extremes to ensure that this heir, this forgotten bloodline, was erased from history? Was it Jay Gould himself, so desperate to protect his empire from any threat to his power? Or had it been someone else, someone within the family, perhaps a spouse or a trusted confidant, who had seen the threat in this child's existence and chosen to silence him forever? The more one looked at the document, the more it became clear that the erasure had been done with precision. There were no accidental mistakes in this omission. Each line, each word, had been deliberately struck out. There was no room for error when you were erasing a person from the very fabric of history. And yet, despite the careful measures taken to ensure his name was lost, traces of him remained. Traces that would lead any determined investigator to the truth, as though someone, somewhere, wanted this story to be told. As the document was turned over, the names of the heirs who had been granted their place in the Gould fortune were all there, neatly written, signed with authority. But the son, the one who should have been included, was a void, a blank space where his name should have been. This was not just a simple omission. This was a calculated erasure, an act so extreme that it hinted at something far more sinister. The implications of this erasure were profound. The Gould family, whose name had been synonymous with wealth and power, had gone to great lengths to protect their legacy. But at what cost? What kind of legacy was it that could be so easily manipulated, so easily destroyed? Was it the fear of scandal that had driven them to such extremes? Or was it something darker, an unspoken truth about the nature of Jay Gould's wealth and the men who surrounded him? The more one delved into the details, the more questions arose. Who were the witnesses to this act of erasure? Who had signed off on the decision to remove this child from the records of the Gould family? And what of the rumors that had swirled around Gould's affairs? Were these whispers of a hidden son merely the tip of the iceberg, a glimpse into the darker corners of a man's life that no one had dared to speak of? In the silence of the room, the weight of these questions pressed in, heavy and suffocating. There was a darkness here, a legacy that had been buried so deeply that even those who might have known the truth were long gone. The witnesses to this secret had vanished, their voices lost to time, but their silence spoke volumes. As the document was placed back into its hiding spot, a faint scratching sound echoed in the stillness, like the scratching of a name being erased from a page. It was the sound of history being rewritten, of a story that would never be fully told. But perhaps, just perhaps, the time had come to reveal it. A name had been struck from a document, a person erased from a family's history. But that erasure was not complete, for in the dark corners of the Gould legacy, the truth still lingered, waiting to be uncovered. The silence, thick and heavy, held within it the promise of a story that had been hidden for far too long. And just as the door to the room creaked closed, a faint glint of light caught the edge of an old, tarnished photograph. The face in the photograph, familiar yet distant, was smudged, its features obscured by time. But one thing was certain: the truth was closer than ever. What would happen if the world ever learned what had been hidden for so long? The question echoed in the silence, a question that would soon demand an answer. But for now, the truth remained locked away, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The family gathered in the grand parlor, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the opulent walls of the mansion. It was a place meant for celebration, for toasting to victories and toasting to the future. But tonight, the air was heavy, thick with unspoken words and hidden intentions. The power that Jay Gould had so carefully built was now slipping, cracking under the weight of the very secrets he had thought would remain buried forever. The exclusion of his illegitimate son from the will had not just erased a name, it had created a fault line that would eventually split the Gould family apart. At the heart of this fracture was a legacy that no one could afford to ignore. Gould's fortune, amassed through the ruthless expansion of railroads and industries, was vast, far beyond the reach of ordinary men. But for all the wealth, the golden age that he had ushered in for his family came at a price. In an era where power was everything, where the lineage of those who controlled the wealth could dictate the future, the removal of an heir had consequences far beyond the immediate. The fortune that was meant to bind the Goulds together now became the battlefield, with every member of the family desperate to secure their claim to a throne built on iron and greed. The act itself had been calculated, cold, and precise. The erasure of this child was not a mere oversight. It was an act of manipulation that had been carefully crafted by the very hands that had built the empire. Jay Gould's legitimate heirs, those who stood to inherit the fruits of his labor, knew well the price of preserving their status. To acknowledge the illegitimate son would have been to open a door that no one in the family wanted to walk through. The fortune, the power, the respect, they were all at stake, and the stakes were high. But what had started as a simple, almost surgical act of control soon spiraled into something far more destructive. As the years went on, the silence surrounding this erased heir began to fester. The family's carefully constructed facade started to crack. The heirs who had been given their place at the table were not as united as they appeared. There were whispers behind closed doors, rumors of bitterness and resentment. Brothers and sisters, once loyal allies in the preservation of their legacy, now found themselves at odds. The act of exclusion had been too great a burden to bear, and the consequences were impossible to ignore. Behind the gilded doors of the mansion, the pressure grew. The once perfect image of the Gould family, untouched by scandal, unbothered by the complexities of the world outside, was now at risk. No longer did they sit comfortably on the thrones they had built for themselves. The fear of exposure haunted them. The fear of the truth, once buried, creeping back into the light, kept them awake at night. They had manipulated the records, altered the very fabric of their family's history, and now they were paying the price. And yet, as the shadows lengthened, a new fear began to take root. The documents, the letters, the carefully kept secrets, they were not as safe as they once were. Someone knew the truth. Someone had begun to piece together the story that had been erased. The very room where these conversations were whispered was now being searched by those who sought answers, those who dared to uncover what had been kept hidden for so long. The house, once a symbol of strength and invulnerability, now felt like a prison. The walls that had been built to protect the Gould legacy were closing in on those who had tried so hard to preserve it. In the dim light of the study, where the will had been sealed, the truth began to seep out, like ink smudging the edges of a forgotten letter. A face, once erased, began to reappear in the cracks of the family's history. The portrait in the hallway, long ignored and hidden in plain sight, now seemed to mock the family. Its gaze, once blank and undefined, now held a question that could no longer be ignored. A name, once lost, was no longer so easy to erase. It was there in the whispered conversations between family members. It was there in the flickering candlelight that danced across the mansion's walls. And as the weight of the past grew heavier, the question remained: how far would the Goulds go to protect their legacy? How much were they willing to sacrifice to keep the dark secret buried? The door to the vault, once sealed tight, now creaked open ever so slightly. A name, hidden, erased, forgotten, waited to be revealed. And in the silence of the night, as the family gathered once more, the sound of a name being spoken, whispered from the shadows, echoed through the halls, carrying with it the weight of generations. What would happen when the family's carefully constructed empire was no longer enough to hold back the truth? Would they turn on each other, torn apart by the very legacy they had tried so desperately to preserve? The answer, like the name that had been erased, was still waiting to be discovered. The sun had long since set, but the warmth of the study remained, lingering in the stale air, as the flickering flame from a single candle danced on the mahogany desk. The room was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. In the shadows, a leather-bound file lay open, revealing a series of letters, carefully tucked between aged sheets of paper. These letters, though seemingly mundane at first glance, held within them the very core of the Gould family's darkest secret, the hidden son, erased from history with the aid of men who knew exactly how to operate within the legal framework that protected the wealth and power of the elite. The letters were written by some of the most prestigious lawyers of the time, men who, in the eyes of the public, were above reproach. Their names were well known, their reputations sterling. But behind the polished facades of these legal giants, there was a different truth. These men were the silent architects of a plan to bury a bloodline that threatened the survival of an empire. As the letters were read, it became evident that the system, so carefully constructed by men like Jay Gould, had been manipulated with the same precision that was used to build the railroads and the fortunes they carried. In the flickering light, the words began to take shape. These were not just legal documents, they were instructions, meticulously crafted, outlining how to conceal the illegitimate heir, ensuring that his existence would never disturb the pristine line of succession. The methods were simple, yet chilling in their clarity. Omit him from all records, erase his name from all future wills, and quietly silence those who might dare to speak of him. No one would ever know. The lawyers, knowing the power they held over the system, carefully crafted language that would ensure this heir was forgotten. They wrote with a cold, clinical precision, laying out steps to protect not just the fortune of the Gould family, but the very fabric of the society that had enabled them to thrive. There were references to amendments in the will, adjustments to trusts, and corrections in the ledger, each word chosen carefully to hide the truth, to protect the powerful, and to bury the powerless. As these words spilled across the pages, it became clear that the system was not broken. It had been designed to operate in exactly this way, shielding the elite from any consequences of their actions. The law was a tool, and these men wielded it with a mastery that few would dare challenge. But as the pages turned, the weight of this deception began to sink in. These lawyers, trusted men in the eyes of the public, had knowingly participated in a cover-up. They had carefully navigated the legal system to ensure that the Gould fortune remained untouched, that the empire built by Jay Gould and his contemporaries would remain firmly in the hands of the family members deemed worthy of it. Yet, as the secrets began to emerge, one could not help but wonder, at what cost? The cost was far more than the reputation of a family. It was the lives of those left behind in the shadows. The illegitimate son, denied his place in the world, was not the only casualty of this legal manipulation. There were others, witnesses silenced, documents erased, records altered, all designed to maintain the illusion of a perfect legacy. The fear of exposure, the fear of scandal, weighed heavily on every word, every action, and every decision made by those who sought to protect the Gould name. The lawyers, the family, even those outside of it, everyone knew that to reveal the truth would be to destroy the very thing they had worked so hard to protect. Yet the truth, buried deep within these legal documents, began to leak through the cracks. With each new discovery, the veil of secrecy lifted just a little more. As the letters were read, one could almost hear the sound of history being rewritten, of the carefully constructed lies beginning to unravel. The silence of the past was deafening, yet it could not hold forever. The documents, once carefully hidden, were now being uncovered, and with them the shadow of the forgotten heir loomed larger and larger. In the quiet corners of the room, where the candlelight flickered and the weight of history pressed down on every surface, there was a sense of inevitability. The walls that had held these secrets for so long were beginning to crack, and the truth, once buried, was about to come to light. The name that had been erased, the face that had been lost, would soon be found. The final letter, written in the hand of one of Gould's most trusted legal advisors, was different from the others. It was short, direct, and chilling in its finality. "This must remain hidden," it read, "for the sake of the empire." But even as the ink dried on those words, one could almost hear the faint echo of the past, the quiet stirrings of a secret long buried but never truly forgotten. As the last page was turned, the room fell into a heavy silence. The air felt thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the world moved on, but here, in this dimly lit study, time stood still. The names, the documents, the letters, all of it was now in the open, waiting for the world to discover what had been kept hidden for so long. And as the candle flickered one last time, casting shadows that seemed to stretch into eternity, the question remained: what would happen when the truth was finally exposed? What would become of the empire built on lies? And what would be the cost of revealing the legacy of the forgotten heir? The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of history. And then, in the distance, the faintest sound could be heard: a door creaking open, a name whispered in the dark. The truth was finally on the verge of being revealed, and no one, not even those who had tried to bury it, could stop it now. The mansion stood silent under the weight of the night, its ornate windows reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights that flickered in the distance. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of old books and dust, the kind that settled into forgotten corners and lingered in the spaces between memories. It was here, amidst the walls that had witnessed the rise of an empire, that the story of the forgotten son of Jay Gould would unfold. A story buried so deep that even the most determined investigator would be hard-pressed to uncover it. But beneath the layers of silence and secrecy, there was something more. A shadow cast over the Gould legacy, one that could not be ignored. The name of the son had been removed not just from the will, but from history itself. No birth certificates, no letters, no photographs, nothing. It was as though he had never existed. In a time when every detail of a family's lineage was recorded, preserved and passed down as a sacred heirloom, the absence of this boy from the Gould family's history was as deliberate as it was unsettling. In a world built on power and legacy, to have no record was to be nothing. And that was exactly what they had made him: nothing. The absence of records was more than an oversight. It was an erasure of identity, an attempt to make sure that this son, this forgotten heir, was never allowed to take his rightful place in the story of the Gould family. The files were empty, the documents vanished, the press silent. Where one might have expected to find even a single mention, perhaps a letter, a passing reference, a photo that hinted at a life once lived, there was only blankness. This was no ordinary omission. It was the work of men who understood the stakes of power, the consequences of a threat to the established order. The legal systems they had shaped had no room for such a complication. Jay Gould, the iron-fisted master of his domain, had left nothing to chance when it came to securing the future of his empire. But in his attempt to ensure that the bloodline of his fortune remained pure, he had paid a steep price, one that not even his heirs would escape unscathed. There were whispers, of course, even if no one dared to speak them aloud. The servants who had worked in the house for decades had seen things, overheard conversations in the dead of night when the rich and powerful thought no one was listening. But these witnesses were silent, their voices silenced by fear, by money, by the knowledge that to speak would be to invite ruin. Their stories, too, were erased, by time, by threats, by the unyielding power of the family. But the absence of records, the deliberate erasure of a human being's existence, spoke louder than any word could. It told the story of a family willing to go to any length to protect its own. No trace of this son was left behind to haunt them, to threaten their control. But what did it cost them to silence him? What price had they paid to ensure that their history would remain untarnished? It was in the gaps, the spaces where records should have been, that the true mystery began to take shape. The Goulds had erased the evidence, yes, but in doing so, they had left behind a trail, one that would eventually lead back to them. The records might have been altered, the documents destroyed, but the truth could never be fully erased. It lingered, waiting, in the dark corners of their empire, like a forbidden room whose door had been locked but never quite sealed shut. As the investigation into the Gould archives deepened, the absence of this heir became more and more impossible to ignore. The deeper one dug, the more the question loomed. Why was this child so dangerous that his very existence had to be expunged? What was it about him that had made him such a threat to the powerful family that had once ruled the railroads and the cities they had built? No one had ever dared to ask. But now, as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the questions could no longer be avoided. The question was not just who had erased him, but why? And what did that say about the men who had ruled the Gilded Age, whose wealth and power were as much about maintaining control over the past as they were about shaping the future? A name had been erased, a legacy concealed, but the silence that followed only deepened the mystery. It was as though the family had tried to lock away not just a person, but an entire history. A history that would, one day, come rushing back. The documents may have been shredded, the records destroyed, but the past could not be entirely buried. It had a way of resurfacing, no matter how hard one tried to suppress it. In the flickering candlelight of that old study, the faintest sound echoed in the distance, the sound of something hidden, something forgotten, ready to be revealed. A name, long silenced, was waiting to speak. And the moment it did, the Gould legacy would never be the same again. The door to the vault, once sealed tight, now hung slightly ajar, the dim glow of a long-forgotten truth spilling out into the darkness. What would happen when the world finally learned what had been kept from them for so long? The answer, like the name that had been erased, was still waiting to be uncovered. The mansion stood like a dark sentinel, its silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the moon. Inside, the corridors were filled with whispers, whispers that had traveled through time, now echoing within these gilded walls. The rooms, once the stage for grand celebrations and powerful alliances, were now home to secrets so well guarded that even the walls themselves seemed to tremble in silence. But as the investigation delved deeper into the folds of the Gould family's legacy, the question remained. Was the removal of Jay Gould's illegitimate son simply a decision made by a father protecting his empire, or was there more at play? More forces, both internal and external, pressing the family to make this fateful choice. In the grand world of the Gilded Age, where fortunes were not just made but carefully nurtured, every decision carried weight. And behind those decisions, especially in families like the Goulds, were silent pacts, unspoken agreements between the powerful that held the very fabric of their empire together. The family's wealth was not just a product of Gould's ruthless business acumen, but also a result of these quiet negotiations, these deals made in the shadows, where words were as binding as any legal contract. And in the case of the forgotten heir, there was no shortage of silent deals. As the story unraveled, it became clear that the omission of the son was not a lone decision made in a moment of passion by Jay Gould alone. No, it was the result of a careful and calculated maneuver, a maneuver that had likely been discussed, planned, and even agreed upon in private meetings with family members and trusted advisors. The exclusion was not just a move to preserve Gould's fortune, it was a strategic play to ensure the control of the empire remained firmly in the hands of those who mattered, the legitimate heirs, the ones whose names would continue to appear in the family's records and at the head of the company's board meetings. But this decision was not without its consequences. Behind closed doors, where the family gathered in the quietest corners of their mansion, there were discussions, long, drawn-out conversations full of hesitations and whispers, where every word carried weight. The older members of the family, those who had long been beneficiaries of Gould's wealth, knew exactly what was at stake. The empire they had built was fragile, and any disruption to the bloodline, any potential claim by a forgotten child, could unravel everything. The very notion of an illegitimate son, a child who had been erased from the family's history, became a threat that had to be buried, a threat that could destabilize the Gould legacy and, by extension, the future of the empire. These conversations were not just about wealth. They were about control. They were about the future of the family's position in society. And in the cold, calculating minds of the Goulds, the decision was clear. There could be no room for a son whose very existence threatened the balance of power within the family. It wasn't just Gould's decision. It was a collective decision, made by those who stood to inherit the most. The son was erased, not only from the will, but from the entire fabric of the Gould legacy. No records, no mention, no legacy. He became a ghost, a phantom in the eyes of history. And in his absence, the family's wealth would remain unchallenged, their power undisturbed. Yet, as the years passed and the empire expanded, cracks began to form. The very men who had orchestrated this erasure, the family members who had been complicit in silencing the truth, could not ignore the tension that simmered beneath the surface. The empire they had preserved was growing heavier, more fragile with each passing year. The silent pact that had been made all those years ago, an agreement to protect the family's fortune, was beginning to tear at the seams. The silences grew longer, the whispers more urgent. There were, of course, those who knew. The servants, the advisors, the lawyers, those who had witnessed the manipulation of records, the destruction of evidence, the quiet silencing of witnesses, knew the truth. They had seen the way the family moved behind closed doors, the way they spoke in hushed tones, and the way they manipulated the press to shape their public image. But they too remained silent, for fear of what would happen if they dared to speak, for fear of the consequences that would inevitably follow any attempt to undo what had been done. Yet, even in their silence, there was a sense that the truth was never fully buried. It lingered, like a shadow, cast over every decision made by the Gould family, every expansion of their empire, every new business deal they forged. The truth was there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It was a truth so powerful, so destructive, that those who had played a part in its concealment could no longer escape its pull. In the darkest corners of the mansion, where even the family dared not venture, there were remnants of the past, whispers of an erased heir, a legacy hidden, a truth silenced. The walls, which had once been the silent witnesses to the family's rise, now stood as silent sentinels, waiting for the moment when the truth would be revealed and the empire built on silence would come crashing down. The mansion, once a symbol of power and invulnerability, now felt like a house on the edge of collapse. The very walls seemed to groan under the weight of the past, as though they, too, were struggling to hold in the secrets that had been buried within them. And as the investigation continued, a door, hidden in plain sight, began to show signs of wear. A door that hadn't appeared on any original blueprints. A door that, for years, had been locked and sealed, now seemed to beckon, its presence more obvious than ever before. What was behind that door? What was waiting to be uncovered when it was finally opened? The answers, like the truth about the forgotten heir, were just out of reach, but they were no longer hidden. The silence that had once protected the Gould family was now on the verge of breaking, and in the distance the faintest sound of a door creaking open echoed through the halls, just enough to send a chill through the air. The darkness was about to be illuminated. What would be found within the secrets of that room? Would the family's darkest legacy finally be revealed? Or would it remain buried, hidden behind the walls of the mansion, forever? The truth was on the verge of spilling out, but who would be left to hear it? The quiet corridors of the Gould mansion had always held an air of invulnerability, as though the walls themselves could ward off the gossip of the outside world. The polished floors and gilded frames were the backdrop for generations of triumph, with wealth and power woven into every tapestry, every sweeping staircase. But beneath the facade of opulence, a storm was brewing, one that threatened not only the family's legacy, but the very foundations of the elite society in which they reigned. The manipulation of Jay Gould's inheritance, the deliberate exclusion of his illegitimate son, was not just an act of control over the fortune that he had carefully constructed. It was a calculated move, a strategic ploy to ensure that the empire he had built would remain untouched by the chaos of any family dispute. The son's erasure was not simply about money. It was about power, about maintaining a status that was built on silence and secrecy. Gould understood, perhaps better than most, that the wealth of the Gilded Age was fragile, and the slightest crack in the foundation, whether from scandal or familial discord, could send it all tumbling down. In the inner circles of New York's elite, the game was always about appearances. Beneath the polished smiles and tailored suits, the competition was fierce. Alliances were formed and broken with the same ease as a businessman might shake hands on a deal. And no one was more acutely aware of this than the Gould family. The exclusion of a son, an heir with a claim to the fortune, was a risk, but one that had to be managed. The Goulds, along with their fellow magnates, understood that wealth was not just an asset. It was a weapon, and weapons, when misused, could be deadly. But what the Goulds didn't foresee was that this act of exclusion, this erasure of a child from the family's history, would not remain buried. The decision had created a fissure in the family's structure, a crack that was beginning to show in ways they hadn't expected. The very thing they feared, internal strife, disputes over power, was now beginning to seep into their world, threatening to unravel everything they had so carefully built. Within the family, the tension was palpable. The older generations, those who had benefited the most from Gould's wealth, were determined to protect their positions, to preserve their hold over the empire. But the younger generation, the sons and daughters who had been groomed to inherit their father's fortune, began to feel the strain. What had been promised to them as a birthright was now overshadowed by the knowledge that this inheritance had come at a price. The price was silence. The price was the erasure of a brother, a blood relative, a name that had been buried for the sake of keeping the family intact. The secrecy surrounding the Gould fortune was a fragile thing. It depended on the quiet cooperation of family members, the silence of the servants, the manipulation of public records. The system they had created to protect their legacy, this perfect facade of wealth and power, was, in fact, riddled with cracks, invisible to the outside world, but increasingly obvious to those who lived within the walls of the mansion. For those who had been complicit in the decision to erase the illegitimate son, the weight of the secret was growing heavier. It wasn't just the fear of scandal that haunted them. It was the knowledge that this decision, made in the dark, was now threatening to unravel everything they had worked so hard to preserve. The power structures within the family were starting to shift, and those who had once been the heirs to Gould's empire were now questioning their place in it. The legal documents, the hidden letters, the silenced witnesses, all of it began to resurface. What had been buried under layers of legalese and secrecy was now coming to light, slowly but surely. And as each new document was uncovered, it revealed more than just the story of a forgotten heir. It revealed the true nature of the Gould empire, the lengths they had gone to in order to protect their power, and the price they had paid for that protection. Outside the mansion, the world was changing. The Gilded Age was drawing to a close, and with it, the old systems of power and wealth were being questioned. The very idea of dynastic wealth, families that controlled entire industries, was coming under scrutiny. The press, which had once been so easily manipulated, was now starting to ask harder questions. The world outside the Gould's walls was beginning to look at them differently, and the secrets they had kept hidden for so long were no longer as safe as they once seemed. But within the family, the silence remained. The Goulds, desperate to maintain the illusion of perfection, continued to play their roles, their lives curated for public consumption. The mansion, with its gilded frames and opulent halls, remained a symbol of their success, but it was now also a symbol of their fragility. The cracks in the facade were widening, and the walls that had once held their power were beginning to crumble under the weight of their own secrets. In the quiet, dim-lit corners of the mansion, a new chapter in the Gould legacy, was beginning to unfold. It was a chapter that would not be written in the public records, not in the carefully crafted wills and documents that had protected the family for so long. No, this chapter would be written in the spaces between the lines, in the whispers that echoed in the halls at night, in the hidden rooms where the truth could no longer be silenced. The name, long erased from the family's history, was beginning to resurface, and the tensions it had created were now impossible to ignore. The Goulds had spent decades building their empire, but in the end, it was a legacy built on silence, on manipulation, and on the erasure of a name. And now, as the truth began to emerge, they were left to wonder, how much longer could they protect their empire from the consequences of their own actions? As the candlelight flickered and the sounds of the mansion settled into the night, there was a feeling, an uneasy tension, that something was about to shift. The legacy of Jay Gould, with all its wealth and power, was standing at the edge of a precipice, and as the secrets of the past threatened to break free, the question remained: would the Gould family's empire survive the weight of its own legacy, or would it collapse under the pressure of its own hidden truths? A name was waiting to be spoken, a door waiting to be opened. And as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, it was clear. Things would never be the same again. The grand halls of the Gould mansion were built on a foundation of wealth and secrecy, their golden chandeliers casting long shadows over the polished floors. Yet within the walls of this monument to power, a deep unease had begun to settle, unnoticed by the public but keenly felt within the family. The manipulation of Jay Gould's legacy, the quiet erasure of a son from the line of succession, had cast a dark cloud over the house. The once perfect facade was cracking, revealing the fault lines beneath the surface of the Gould empire. For years, the family had been protected by their wealth, untouchable, unchallenged. But as the consequences of Gould's decisions began to ripple through the corridors of power, it became clear that the price of their legacy was higher than anyone had imagined. The other heirs, those who had been favored by Gould's decisions, began to question the very foundations of their inheritance. The existence of the erased son, once hidden behind a wall of legal manipulation, now left a void, a ghost in the family's history that threatened to disrupt everything. The first cracks appeared not in the public eye, but in the quiet rooms of the mansion, where the family gathered under the weight of their newfound knowledge. The air in the drawing rooms was thick with unspoken words. The younger heirs, those who had been raised to believe they were the rightful inheritors of Gould's empire, could no longer ignore the question that lingered in the air. What had truly motivated Gould to eliminate his own bloodline? The secrecy surrounding this decision, this deliberate act of exclusion, had left them feeling uncertain about their place in the family's legacy. The question was no longer about who would inherit. It was about who had the right to inherit at all. Behind closed doors, there were hushed conversations and quiet confrontations. Some of the heirs, those who had long been comfortable in their positions, began to see the subtle shifts in the power dynamics. Their father's empire, built on iron and steel, was not as solid as they had once thought. The fortune, carefully curated through decades of ruthless business dealings, was now fragile. What had once been a legacy of unquestioned authority was now under threat, threatened not by outside forces, but from within. The family's own decisions were beginning to unravel the very foundation they had worked so hard to build. The Goulds had always known the power of secrecy. In the world of the Gilded Age, where wealth and power were as fragile as glass, secrets were weapons, and silence was often the sharpest blade. But in the years since the illegitimate son was erased, the family's control had slipped. The cracks in the Gould empire were not just the result of the son's exclusion. They were the result of the weight of the lie that had been woven into the family's history. The manipulation of records, the destruction of evidence, and the silencing of witnesses had been necessary to preserve their legacy. But now, as the family faced the consequences of their actions, they found themselves trapped in a game they had never intended to play. Outside the walls of the mansion, the world had changed. The Gilded Age, once a time of unrivaled wealth and power, was starting to show signs of decay. The press, once easily controlled, was now beginning to ask harder questions, and the public was becoming more aware of the inequities that had allowed the Goulds and others like them to thrive. But inside the family, the questions were more personal. Could they continue to protect their legacy? Could they preserve the empire built on the backs of those who had been silenced? The tensions that had begun to rise within the family were not just about money or power. They were about trust. The heirs who had benefited from Gould's decisions now found themselves questioning not just their inheritance, but their place in a family built on deception. The empire they had inherited was now a battlefield, and the once immovable walls that had kept the Gould name at the top of the social hierarchy were now showing signs of strain. The family's attempts to control their narrative, to keep their history untarnished, had begun to unravel. As the tensions grew, so did the whispers. Some of the heirs began to privately challenge the decisions made by their father. They were no longer willing to accept the role they had been handed without questioning the cost of that inheritance. What had they truly inherited? A fortune, yes, but at what price? Behind closed doors, these quiet rebellions took root. The younger heirs, those who had grown up in the shadow of Gould's empire, began to question the very legitimacy of their inheritance. The erased son, the one who had been silenced, was no longer a ghost. He had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the Gould legacy. And as the younger generation of Goulds looked at the empire they had inherited, they saw not just the riches, but the weight of the lies, the secrets, and the sacrifices that had been made to protect it. The family's empire, once an untouchable monolith, was now under siege, not from external forces, but from within. The tension that had simmered beneath the surface for so long had finally come to a head. The family was no longer united by their shared wealth. They were divided by the very legacy they had been given. And as the battle for the future of the Gould fortune raged on, one question loomed larger than any other. Who truly had the right to the legacy? In the study, the papers that had once been hidden away, documents that should never have seen the light of day, were now being read, scrutinized, and debated. Every word, every signature carried the weight of a family's future. But even as the heirs debated their fates, they knew one thing for certain. The legacy of Jay Gould, built on secrets and silence, could no longer be protected. The truth was no longer something they could control. And in the stillness of the room, a final, unsettling thought lingered. What if the true legacy of the Gould family was not the fortune they had built, but the ghosts they had buried along the way? What if the greatest threat to their empire was not the loss of wealth, but the unraveling of the very story that had made them powerful? As the last candle flickered and the silence descended once more, the doors to the past creaked open, revealing the dark truth that had been kept hidden for so long. The legacy of the Gould family was on the verge of being rewritten, but at what cost? In the distance, the faint sound of a door unlocking echoed through the halls, the noise barely audible but deafening in its implications. The secrets were about to come to light, and when they did, nothing would ever be the same. The mansion's grandeur had once been a fortress, its towering walls and ornate ceilings a testament to the power and influence of the Gould family. Yet, as the years had passed, the facade that had shielded them from the outside world was beginning to show signs of decay. No longer was the house a symbol of unquestioned dominance, but a reflection of the cracks that had begun to form within the very core of the Gould dynasty. The questions, once whispered in the shadows, were now coming to the surface, demanding answers that no one within the family was ready to give. The impact of Jay Gould's decision to erase his illegitimate son from the family legacy rippled far beyond the realm of business. It wasn't just a matter of wealth, it was about control, power, and the delicate web of alliances that held the Gould empire together. The once harmonious family, united by a shared vision of wealth and success, was now splintering at the seams. The younger heirs, those who had been groomed to carry the family's legacy, were no longer willing to remain silent. The truth of their inheritance, once wrapped in the gilded veil of secrecy, was now unraveling before their eyes. Each day, the family's internal divisions grew more apparent. The younger generation began to question the sacrifices made to protect their father's empire. They began to wonder if their place in the family's history was truly earned or merely handed to them on the foundation of someone else's erasure. The question of their legitimacy, once something they had never dared consider, now loomed large. If Jay Gould had been willing to silence one part of the family to preserve his empire, could he not also do the same with them? Their inheritance, though vast, now seemed fragile, built not on the bedrock of honor and merit, but on the shifting sands of manipulation and secrecy. The atmosphere within the mansion grew tense as the older generation, those who had benefited most from Gould's manipulations, began to feel the pressure. They too had been complicit in the erasure of the forgotten heir. They had turned a blind eye to the child who had been denied his place in the family, and now they were beginning to realize the cost of their silence. The foundations of their own power, their own wealth, were tied to a lie that had been hidden for decades but was now beginning to crack open under the weight of the family's own discontent. Among the younger heirs, there was a growing sense of rebellion. They had been taught to accept their inheritance as a given, but now they were questioning everything. They were beginning to see that their power, their position in society, was not the result of their own efforts, but of a family history built on secrets and omissions. The more they dug into their family's past, the more they uncovered. Letters burned in the dead of night, records erased, witnesses silenced. The truth was not as simple as they had once thought, and as the weight of it settled over them, they began to wonder if they could ever escape the shadow of the sins committed by their ancestors. The Goulds had always been adept at controlling the narrative. They knew how to manipulate the press, how to shape public opinion, how to maintain the appearance of perfection, even as the cracks grew beneath the surface. But this time, the story was slipping away from them. The truth had a way of emerging, no matter how tightly they tried to control it. The younger heirs began to realize that their inheritance came with a price that was now too steep to ignore. As the tensions within the family grew, the question became not just about who would inherit the fortune, but about what kind of legacy the Goulds wanted to leave behind. The fortune, once a symbol of power, was now a source of division. The younger generation was no longer content to inherit a legacy built on secrecy and manipulation. They wanted something more, a legacy that was built on transparency, on integrity, on the belief that wealth should be earned, not inherited through the erasure of others. In the dimly lit study, where the family's darkest secrets had been kept hidden for decades, the investigation continued. Papers were sifted through, letters were examined, and each new discovery revealed more about the family's twisted legacy. The truth about the forgotten heir was slowly coming to light, piece by piece, and as it did, the walls that had once protected the Goulds began to crumble. They had built their empire on the backs of others, and now those very foundations were beginning to show their cracks. The mansion, which had once been a place of celebration, now felt cold and oppressive. The air was thick with the weight of the past, and each room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next revelation. The Gould family, once so sure of their place at the top, was now facing a reckoning. The younger heirs, emboldened by their discovery of the truth, were no longer willing to remain silent. They had seen what their family had done to protect its legacy, and they knew that they could not inherit this empire without confronting its darkest secrets. And so the battle for the Gould legacy began, not just for the fortune, but for the soul of the family. The younger heirs knew that in order to claim their inheritance, they would have to confront the truth, no matter the cost. But as they delved deeper into the past, they realized that the truth was far more complicated than they had imagined. The erasure of the illegitimate son had set off a chain of events that had affected not just the family, but the very foundation of their empire. The question now was not just about who would inherit the Gould fortune, but about what kind of legacy they wanted to build. Could they break free from the dark history of their family? Could they forge a new path, one that was not tainted by the sins of the past? Or would they be doomed to repeat the mistakes of their ancestors, trapped in the same cycle of secrecy and manipulation that had defined the Gould legacy for so long? In the stillness of the mansion, the answers seemed just out of reach. But one thing was certain: the Gould family's legacy was about to be rewritten, and when the truth was finally revealed, nothing would ever be the same again. The candlelight flickered one last time, casting long shadows across the room. And in that moment, it was clear: the empire that Jay Gould had built was no longer untouchable. The cracks in the walls had grown too wide to ignore, and the Gould legacy was on the verge of collapse. As the door to the study creaked open, the sound echoed through the mansion, signaling that the truth was no longer a secret. The walls that had once kept the family's power intact were now failing them, and the legacy they had worked so hard to protect was about to be exposed. What would happen when the truth finally came to light? Would the Gould family survive the weight of its own history, or would it collapse under the pressure of the secrets it had tried so desperately to keep hidden? In the distance, the faint sound of a name being whispered in the dark was heard, a name long forgotten but never truly erased. And as the mansion stood silent, waiting for the inevitable, the legacy of Jay Gould hung in the balance. The mansion, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, stood at the edge of Fifth Avenue like a silent sentinel, guarding the wealth and power of the Gould family. Its towering walls, adorned with intricate carvings and glistening marble columns, were a testament to the empire Jay Gould had built. Yet beneath the polished veneer of opulence and grandeur, there was a darker story hidden within these walls. The mansion was not just a home, it was the birthplace of decisions that would shape the future of a family, a fortune, and an entire era. Behind its closed doors, matters of power, legacy, and control were negotiated in shadows, away from the prying eyes of the public. It was here, in these secretive chambers, that the most important choices were made, choices that would affect not only the Gould family, but the very fabric of society itself. As much as the mansion stood as a symbol of Gould's wealth and success, it was also a symbol of the opacity that defined the lives of the elite during the Gilded Age. Behind its gleaming facade, the mansion held secrets, decisions made behind closed doors that were never meant to see the light of day. The family's affairs, their wealth, and their future were all hidden from the public eye, shielded by walls that kept the truth locked away. What the world saw were the lavish parties, the endless parade of guests, and the shimmering wealth. But what remained out of sight, behind the heavy velvet curtains and ornate doors, was a far different world, a world of manipulation, control, and the ruthless preservation of power. In the private rooms of the mansion, away from the public gaze, Jay Gould and his inner circle made decisions that would shape the future of the empire he had built. It was here, in these rooms, that the fates of many were sealed, decisions that had far-reaching consequences, not just for the Goulds, but for anyone who found themselves caught in the web of their power. These decisions were not made lightly. They were calculated, deliberate moves made with the understanding that, in this world of immense wealth and power, there could be no room for mistakes. But it wasn't just Gould who operated within the confines of these walls. The mansion had always been a hub for the most powerful men and women of the era. It was here that alliances were forged and broken, where deals were struck that would determine the future of entire industries. And it was here that the fate of the Gould fortune was decided. The decisions made within these walls were not just about securing wealth, they were about securing power. The Goulds knew better than anyone that in the world of the Gilded Age, power was everything. And to maintain that power, everything else, truth, reputation, even family, had to be sacrificed. The son who had been erased from the family's legacy was just one casualty in this game of power. His existence, once a threat to the Gould fortune, had been systematically erased from the records, and his memory was kept hidden in the darkest corners of the mansion. But even in the depths of the mansion, where the shadows seemed to consume everything in their path, his absence could not go unnoticed. His fate, his exclusion from the family's legacy, was a symbol of the lengths the cow. Goulds were willing to go to protect their empire. It wasn't just about wealth. It was about ensuring that the family's name remained untarnished, that their power remained unquestioned. But as the years passed and the family's empire grew, the consequences of this decision became increasingly difficult to ignore. The mansion, once a place of quiet deliberations, began to feel like a tomb, silent, suffocating, haunted by the ghosts of decisions long past. The absence of the erased son was felt in the very air of the house, like a weight that hung over everything. And the more the family tried to move forward, the more that absence seemed to linger, pulling them back to a past they had worked so hard to bury. The truth, long hidden behind layers of secrecy, was beginning to surface. The mansion, once a symbol of the Gould's power, was now a place where the family's darkest secrets were beginning to unravel. The very walls that had once protected them were now closing in on them, forcing the family to confront the consequences of their actions. And as the truth began to emerge, it became clear that the Gould family's empire was not as secure as it once seemed. The very foundation that had been built on secrecy, manipulation, and control was now under threat. The mansion, once a fortress, had become a prison. In the dim light of the study, where the documents that had been hidden for so long were now laid out on the desk, the truth was finally beginning to come to light. The erased heir, the forgotten son, was no longer just a ghost in the family's past. He was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. His erasure was not just about protecting the Gould fortune. It was about protecting a legacy built on lies, on manipulation, and on the silencing of those who threatened the family's power. The mansion, with its gilded halls and opulent rooms, had always been a place of power. But now it had become a place of reckoning. The walls that had once held the family's secrets were no longer strong enough to keep them in. And as the last pieces of the puzzle fell into place, it was clear the truth was not just a matter of history, it was a matter of survival. As the investigation into the family's past deepened, a single image began to take shape. A name, once erased, now slowly emerging from the darkness. And as the shadows of the mansion seemed to stretch further into the night, the silence grew heavier. What would happen when the truth was finally revealed? What would become of the Gould legacy when the walls that had kept the family's secrets began to crumble? In the deepest recesses of the mansion, where no one dared venture, a door stood ajar, hidden from view, unseen in the original blueprints of the house. Behind that door, a story had been kept locked away, a story that was now on the verge of being revealed. And as the last flicker of candlelight illuminated the room, the truth seemed to be just within reach. A name, once erased, now seemed to demand to be remembered. The legacy of Jay Gould, built on power, wealth, and manipulation, was on the brink of unraveling. The mansion, once a symbol of invincibility, was now a place where the ghosts of the past could no longer be ignored. And as the door creaked open, the family was left to wonder what would happen when the truth finally came to light. The silence that followed was deafening, as though the mansion itself were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable to come. The mansion's grand facade had always been a symbol of unassailable power. Standing tall against the changing skyline of New York's elite, it had been a fortress, built not only with the finest marble and gold, but also with the silent promise of perpetual control. Inside, everything was meticulously arranged, every object in its place, every hallway leading to yet another opulent room, another testament to the Gould legacy. Yet, as grand as it appeared, the mansion was not immune to the subtle tremors of power struggles. The very halls that once resounded with the footsteps of those who had been chosen to inherit the empire now seemed to echo with the faintest whispers of dissent. The mansion, for all its elegance, was not just a home. It was a seat of decisions that would affect not only the family but the very fabric of American society. The decisions made behind its walls, in rooms carefully separated from public view, were often ones of great consequence, carefully calculated to ensure the survival of the Gould legacy. What the world saw was a display of wealth, of family unity, but what lay hidden beneath that pristine surface was a complex web of choices made to maintain a stranglehold on power. As the years passed, however, the weight of these decisions grew heavier. The family members, who once walked through the mansion's gilded corridors with a sense of invincibility, now found themselves increasingly confronted with the consequences of their patriarchs. Manipulation. For all the wealth Gould had amassed, there was an unsettling truth about the cost of it. An empire built not on transparency but on opaqueness, a history buried under layers of secrecy. What had once been a fortress of invulnerability now felt like a house of cards, precariously teetering on the brink of collapse. The deliberate erasure of the illegitimate son was but one example of the lengths to which the Gould family had gone to protect their legacy. His existence had been carefully buried under legal manipulation, his name erased from all official records, his very memory scrubbed from the family's history. But as the years went by, the absence of this erased heir began to gnaw at the foundations of the family's success. A gap, a hole, now existed where a member of the family should have been. The family's historical narrative, so carefully curated, now felt incomplete. Like a jigsaw puzzle with a missing piece, it wasn't just the absence of the son that posed a problem. It was what his erasure revealed. Behind the walls of the mansion, where the family had once confidently made decisions about the future, a new question began to arise. If they could remove him from the legacy so easily, what else could be hidden? What other uncomfortable truths lay buried beneath the mansion's gilded floors and grand staircases? The tension within the family began to grow. Once united by a shared vision of maintaining control, they were now divided by the fear of what might come to light. The fortune they had inherited was no longer seen as a secure inheritance. It was now a battleground, one in which the rules were no longer clear. The mansion, designed to reflect the wealth and power of the Gould family, had also become a prison of sorts, holding the family's most uncomfortable truths behind its closed doors. The walls that had once echoed with the sounds of celebration and success now seemed to hum with the weight of hidden decisions. The family's desire to keep their wealth intact had created an environment where secrets flourished. But secrets, like shadows, could not remain hidden forever. As the investigation into the family's past continued, more and more was revealed about the ways in which Gould had safeguarded his empire. The carefully manipulated wills, the strategically destroyed documents, and the silenced witnesses were not anomalies but part of a pattern that had defined the Gould family's approach to power. But these actions, once seen as necessary to maintain the status quo, were now coming under scrutiny. What had been viewed as an intricate dance of control was now exposed as a web of manipulation, one that had held the Gould family captive in its own machinations. In the quiet, dimly lit study where the family's darkest secrets had been hidden for decades, the truth was finally starting to surface. Every document uncovered, every letter read, brought the family closer to the realization that the wealth they had fought so hard to protect had come at a steep cost, not just to those outside the family, but to those within it. The Goulds had spent decades building an empire based on power and silence, but now the silence was breaking. The cracks in the facade were no longer so easily ignored. The once untouchable mansion had become a tomb of sorts, holding within it the ghosts of decisions made in the name of power, wealth, and preservation. The impact of Gould's decisions on the family was more profound than anyone had anticipated. The younger heirs, once content with their place in the family's hierarchy, began to question the foundations of their inheritance. They had been raised to believe they were the rightful heirs, the ones chosen to carry the Gould name forward. But now they were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that their wealth, their position, had been bought with the silence and erasure of another life. The question, once unspoken, now echoed through the halls of the mansion. What did it mean to inherit this legacy? What did it mean to inherit an empire built not on merit, but on secrets and manipulation? The Goulds had long believed they were untouchable, that their wealth would secure their place in history. But as the investigation into their past grew deeper, they realized that no amount of wealth could shield them from the truth. The mansion's walls, once thought to be impenetrable, now seemed to close in on the family. The very space that had been a sanctuary, a place of power and privilege, was now a prison, holding the family captive to their own history. As the documents continued to surface and the whispers grew louder, it became clear that the family could no longer pretend to be untouched by the secrets they had spent so long hiding. The future of the Gould legacy, once secure in its vaults and archives, was now uncertain, teetering on the edge of exposure. And then, in the darkest corner of the mansion, something shifted. A faint creak, a subtle movement. The door, long thought to be just another forgotten part of the house, now stood ajar. Behind it, something remained hidden, waiting to be revealed. The house, with all its grandeur and secrecy, seemed to breathe with anticipation. The truth was closer than ever, and as the door slowly opened, the family realized that they could no longer keep the past locked away. A name, long erased, was waiting to be spoken. The erasure of a son, once seen as a necessary action to protect the Gould Empire, was now the key to unraveling everything. The family's secrets, carefully preserved for decades, were no longer safe. And as the mansion's walls seemed to shift, a heavy silence filled the air, a silence that would soon be broken. The truth, hidden in the shadows for far too long, was finally emerging, and with it, the legacy of Jay Gould was about to be rewritten. The door creaked open further, the sound sharp in the silence of the mansion. What was inside, what had been hidden away for so many years, was now on the brink of being exposed. The Gould legacy, once thought to be unassailable, was now in jeopardy. And as the last remnants of the past were brought into the light, the question remained, what would be left when the truth finally came to light? The grand mansion of Jay Gould, with its towering walls and intricate stonework, had always been more than a home. It was an edifice of wealth, a bastion of the Gilded Age, built on foundations of power, secrets, and silence. Yet behind its ornate doors, in rooms where the air was thick with the weight of untold stories, there existed a mystery that no one dared speak of and no one truly understood. The story of Gould's illegitimate son, once quietly erased from the family's legacy, had been buried deep within the labyrinth of the mansion's halls, never to be fully uncovered. As the years wore on, the official narrative of the Gould family, carefully crafted and protected by lawyers, publicists, and family members, remained intact. Jay Gould's fortune had passed into the hands of those deemed worthy by blood, and no mention was ever made of the son who had been erased from their midst. But despite the efforts to bury the truth, the questions remained, lingering in the spaces between the carefully written lines of history. What happened to the forgotten heir? Where did he go? Who had been involved in the decision to erase him from the family's future, and why? It was a question that had haunted those who knew the family, whispered among servants, advisors, and distant relatives. The mansion, with its grandiose halls and stately rooms, had been the stage for many of Gould's decisions that shaped not only the family's future, but the very structure of society itself. Yet in the shadows of those opulent spaces, a more complex narrative had always existed, hidden from the public eye, obscured by the fear of scandal and the need for preservation. The erasure of the son, once thought to be a necessary act of control, now seemed more like an attempt to bury something far darker. As the investigation into the family's past continued, the fragments of the story began to surface. Letters, long hidden in forgotten drawers, surfaced in archives. Fragments of conversation, once dismissed as idle gossip, now seemed to hold the key to the past. The son had never truly disappeared. No, his memory had been meticulously scrubbed from the records, his name erased from wills and legal documents, his existence relegated to nothing more than a forgotten shadow. But something had been left behind, something that could not be completely hidden. The family, for all their wealth and power, had never fully controlled the story. The mansion, which had once stood as an impenetrable symbol of their dominance, was now being scrutinized. Its walls had held secrets for far too long, and the echoes of those secrets could no longer be silenced. Behind closed doors, where the family's most important decisions had always been made, the true scope of the erasure began to reveal itself. The Goulds had not just removed a son from their legacy, they had erased an entire line of succession. The decision, once thought to be an act of preservation, now felt like an act of destruction. The son, denied his place in the family's future, had been forgotten by all but a few, and the silence surrounding his fate only added to the mystery. What had driven Jay Gould, the man who had conquered industries and built empires, to silence his own bloodline? Was it just about wealth and inheritance, or was there something more? As the investigation delved deeper into the family's past, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The family, those who had benefited from Gould's fortune, had been complicit in the act of erasure. But more than that, they had been complicit in a cover-up, one that had extended far beyond the walls of the mansion. The official narrative of Gould's legacy had been shaped not only by the family, but by those who held power in the legal and political systems of the time. The son had not only been erased from family history, he had been erased from the very fabric of society. His legacy was not just hidden in the mansion, it had been hidden from the world. But as the investigation continued, the walls of secrecy began to crumble. The legal documents that had been altered, the records that had been destroyed, all began to show signs of wear. The story that had been silenced for so long was now slowly being brought to light, and the consequences of that silence were starting to be felt. The family, for all their power, could no longer escape the shadows of their past. They could no longer pretend that the story of the forgotten heir was simply a matter of business and inheritance. It was personal. It was about the family's very identity, and the truth could not be buried forever. The mansion, once a place of celebration and wealth, now seemed to be a tomb, a place where the secrets of the past lingered in every room, in every portrait that hung on the walls, in every crack in the grand staircase. And as the investigation reached its crescendo, the family found themselves staring into the abyss of their own history. The fortune they had inherited, the legacy they had protected, was now under threat, not from the outside world, but from within. The fear of exposure, of having their darkest secrets brought into the light, loomed over them like a dark cloud. And then, in the dead of night, as the mansion slept under a blanket of silence, a discovery was made. A single letter, hidden behind a false panel in a forgotten room, had survived. It was a letter that had never been meant to be found, a letter that contained the final clue to the mystery of the forgotten heir. The handwriting, familiar yet distant, was unmistakable. It was Jay Gould's own hand, and the words within it were more damning than anyone could have imagined. It was a confession, a final admission that the decision to erase his son had not been made alone. There were others involved, others who had known the truth and had chosen to remain silent. The letter, as it was read in the flickering candlelight, seemed to cast a shadow over everything the family had worked so hard to protect. The secrets that had been buried for so long were now laid bare, and the question remained: what would happen when the world learned the truth? Would the Gould family's empire survive the weight of its own history? Or would it be undone by the very secrets they had spent so many years trying to keep hidden? As the letter was placed back into the drawer, the mansion seemed to exhale, the silence heavy with the weight of the revelation. The walls, once so secure, now felt as though they were closing in. The truth was no longer a whisper in the dark, it was a shout, demanding to be heard. And as the final vestiges of the past were revealed, the final question loomed larger than any before. What would happen when the Gould family's darkest secret was finally exposed? In the distance, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, The footsteps of someone who knew the truth, someone who had lived with the silence for far too long. The truth was coming, and with it, the end of an era. The mansion stood silent, its towering structure an imposing symbol of wealth and influence. Yet, as the darkness of night crept over the estate, it felt less like a place of power and more like a mausoleum, cold, heavy with the weight of the past, haunted by the secrets that had been buried for decades. Inside, the rooms that had once been full of life and laughter now seemed suffocating, as though the very walls had absorbed the tension, the guilt, the weight of everything that had been concealed. As the investigation into the forgotten heir progressed, the family's carefully curated public image began to disintegrate. The opulent facade they had built was starting to crack, revealing a far darker reality beneath. For the Goulds, whose wealth had been earned through ruthless business dealings and calculated manipulations, their fortune was not just a product of their efforts, it was a product of the silencing of others, the erasure of inconvenient truths, and the quiet discarding of anyone who stood in the way of preserving their dominance. The forgotten son was not the first, nor would he be the last, to be removed from the family's history to ensure that their power remained unchallenged. The more the investigation revealed, the more it became clear that the Gould family's grip on their legacy was not as secure as they had believed. The secrets they had worked so hard to protect were now unraveling at an alarming rate. What had once been swept under the rug was now being pulled into the light, and with each new discovery, the weight of their deception grew heavier. The mansion, which had been a place of sanctuary for the family, now felt like a place of reckoning, where the ghosts of their past were finally starting to make their presence known. Behind every locked door, in every forgotten corner of the mansion, there were clues, documents, letters, and records that had been intentionally buried, erased, or hidden away. But for all their efforts, the truth was slowly but surely finding its way to the surface. What had been intended as an act of power, a way to preserve the high Gould legacy, had instead become their greatest liability. The fear of exposure was palpable. As the investigation dug deeper, those who had once been complicit in the family's decisions were beginning to feel the pressure of their silence. They had been silent for too long, but now their silence was a ticking clock, a countdown to the inevitable moment when the truth would come crashing through the walls they had so carefully constructed. The younger generation, those who had once stood by and accepted their inheritance without question, now found themselves questioning everything. They had been raised in luxury, surrounded by wealth and prestige, believing that their place at the top was guaranteed. But now, as the revelations about their family's past mounted, they began to wonder if their fortune had been earned or if it had been bought at the expense of their own morality. They had been told they were the rightful heirs to Gould's empire. But what did that really mean if the empire had been built on deceit? What was their legacy if it was tainted by the secrets of the past? The younger Goulds, once loyal to the family name, now found themselves torn between preserving the legacy and confronting the truth. But it wasn't just the younger generation that felt the weight of the family's secrets. The older members of the family, those who had benefited the most from Gould's manipulations, now found themselves facing the consequences of their past actions. They had long been the gatekeepers of the Gould empire, the ones who had protected its image and shielded it from the prying eyes of the public. But now, as the truth began to surface, they were no longer in control. They were no longer the ones dictating the narrative. The family's carefully constructed public persona was falling apart, and with it, the very foundation of their power. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of wealth and influence, now felt like a prison. Every room, every hallway seemed to hold a secret. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall seemed to carry the weight of the family's history. And as the investigation continued, the mansion's walls, once so solid and unyielding, began to feel more like a tomb, an entombment of secrets, of lies, of the dark legacy that the Goulds had worked so hard to protect. But the truth, like a slow-moving tide, could not be held back forever. It was seeping through the cracks, inching its way toward the surface. The family's Actions had been designed to protect their fortune, to preserve their place at the top, but in their attempts to maintain control, they had made choices that were now coming back to haunt them. The decisions to erase the illegitimate son, to manipulate the legal system, to destroy records. These were the actions of a family desperate to hold on to power, willing to sacrifice anything, even their own blood, to preserve the illusion of control. But now, as the investigation peeled back the layers of their carefully constructed world, the truth was becoming undeniable. The son, once erased from the family's history, was now emerging from the shadows. His legacy, hidden for so long, was being resurrected, piece by piece. The more the family tried to bury him, the more he seemed to rise from the ashes of their manipulation. And as the pieces of his story began to take shape, it became clear that he was not just a victim of the family's decisions. He was a symbol of everything they had tried to keep hidden. His existence, though silenced for decades, was now a key that could unlock the truth about the Gould family's empire. But the truth came at a cost. The mansion, once a safe haven for the Goulds, now felt like a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse. The weight of the family's history was too much to bear, and the walls that had once protected them were now closing in. The empire they had built on secrecy and manipulation was on the brink of unraveling, and with it, the family's legacy. And then, in the quiet of the night, something shifted. A door, once sealed tight, creaked open. It was a door that had never been part of the original plans of the mansion, a door that had always been hidden, unnoticed. But now, as the door slowly creaked open, the room beyond seemed to pulse with anticipation. What lay beyond it? What secrets had been kept hidden for so long? As the faintest light began to spill into the room, the family was forced to confront the truth that had always been just out of reach. In that moment, it became clear. The Gould family's legacy was not just built on wealth. It was built on shadows, and those shadows were now coming into the light. The question was no longer about what had been erased, but what would be revealed when the truth finally emerged. As the door opened wider, the family stood on the precipice of a new chapter, a chapter that would rewrite their history for better or worse. The truth was coming, and with it, the inevitable collapse of the empire that had been built on lies. And as the last remnants of the past were brought into the light, one question lingered in the air. Would the Gould family survive the truth, or would it be undone by the very legacy they had spent so long protecting? The door opened fully, and the shadows that had once hidden the secrets of the Goulds now seemed to stretch toward them, ready to reveal everything they had tried so desperately to keep in the dark. The truth was finally at hand, and nothing would ever be the same again. The mansion, bathed in a ghostly light that barely cut through the heavy drapes, stood in quiet solitude, its secrets echoing through the halls. The once vibrant spaces now carried only the weight of the past, their silences thick with the knowledge of things long hidden. The final pieces of the Gould family's dark legacy, those untold truths, buried beneath layers of legal machinations and falsehoods, had begun to reveal themselves. But the full story remains locked away. What was done to protect the fortune, to shield it from the light of truth, has, in the end, only made the shadows grow darker. As the last door closes on this chapter, the faintest whisper of its contents remains in the air, a lingering presence that refuses to be silenced. The life of Jay Gould's forgotten son, erased from the records, from family history, from the very fabric of the empire, is but a fragment of a much larger story. The empire that Gould built was never truly safe from the fractures within its own walls. The silence, the manipulation, the unspoken agreements that underpinned his fortune, these were the real foundations of the Gould legacy, and they continue to echo throughout the halls of this grand estate. What remains, still concealed in the darkest corners, is not just the erasure of one heir, but the erasure of truths far more unsettling. Those who sought to preserve the empire's image, who wielded the power to right and rewrite history, have left behind a trail of shadows. There are still doors unopened, still rooms unexamined, still names erased that may one day resurface. The mansion, like the family's history, holds its breath, waiting for the moment when the next secret will slip from its confines. The story of the Goulds is not yet over. Every document retrieved, every letter uncovered, raises more questions than answers. What truly happened behind the locked doors of their wealth? Who were the silent witnesses who could not speak of the past? And what of the countless other hidden heirs, erased by the same forces that shaped the Gould Empire? The truth, as it always does, lies just beneath the surface, waiting for the next investigation, the next forgotten room to be opened, the next sealed door to be cracked. As the dust settles in the mansion's halls, the question still lingers. What was the cost of protecting an empire? Was it worth the erasure of not just one life, but of countless others who never had the chance to leave their mark? These are questions that history has yet to answer fully. If this story has stirred something within you, if you found yourself drawn to these forgotten halls, leave your thoughts below. Every perspective helps illuminate what history tried so desperately to bury. If you believe these secrets are worth uncovering, let us know, so that the algorithm may guide others to these hidden corridors of the past. And if you are willing to step deeper into the shadows, the next chamber awaits. Some secrets survive only because those who feared them left no one to tell the truth.